A boy was once born with a knife instead of a right hand, or so Colin had heard. Rape and attempted murder planted him in his mother, but she had lived and turned all of her thoughts toward vengeance. She laughed when he carved his way out of her and went gleefully into the world to slaughter all who had wronged her and many who had not. And when his victims were drowning in their own blood, they might ask, "Who are you?" And he would answer simply, "Dork," which in the northern tongue is an old word for knife. According to the legend, it happened in Skyrim, but assassins liked the story, and it wasn't that uncommon for a brash young up-and-coming killer to take that alias and daydream of making that cryptic reply. The knife in Colin's hand didn't feel remotely a part of him. The handle was slick and clammy, and it made his arm feel huge and obvious, hanging by his side just under the edge of his cloak. Why hadn't the man noticed him? He was just standing there, leaning against the banister of the bridge, staring off toward the lighthouse. He came here each Lordas, after visiting his horse at the stables. Often he met someone here, there was a brief conversation, and they would part. He never spoke to the same person twice. Colin continued toward him. There was traffic on the bridge, mostly folks from way going home for the night with their wagons and the things they hadn't sold at market, lovers trying to find a nice place to be secret. But it was thinning out. They were almost alone. "There you are," the man said. His face was hard to see, as it was cast in shadow by a watchlight a little farther up. Colin knew it well, though. It was long and bony. His hair was black with a little grey, his eyes startling blue. "Here I am," Colin replied, his mouth feeling dry. "Come on over." A few steps and Colin was standing next to him. A group of students from the College of Whispers were loudly approaching. "I like this place," the man said. "I like to hear the bells of the ships and see the light. It reminds me of the sea." "Do you know the sea?" "Shut up," Colin thought. "Please don't talk to me." The students were dithering, pointing at something in the hills northwest. "I'm from Anvil," Colin said, unable to think of anything but the truth. "Ah, nice town, Anvil. What's that place, the one with the dark beer?" "The Undertow." The man smiled. "Right. I like that place." He sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. "What times, eh?" "I used to have a beautiful villa on the headland off Topol Bay. I had a little boat, 2 sails, just for plying near the coast. Now..." He raised his hands and let them drop. "But you didn't come here for any of that, did you?" The students were finally moving off, talking busily in what sounded like a made-up language. "I guess not," Colin agreed. His arm felt larger than ever, the knife like a stone in his hand. "No. Well, it's simple today. You can tell them there's nothing new. And if anyone asks, tell them that no food, no wine, no lover's kiss is as beautiful as a long, deep breath." "What?" "Astery, Book 3. Chapter, what are you holding there?" Stupidly, Colin looked down at the knife, which had slipped from the folds of his cloak and gleamed in the lamplight. Their eyes met. "No," the man shouted. So Colin stabbed him, or tried. The man's palms came up and the knife cut into them. Colin reached with his left hand to try to slap them aside and thrust again, this time slicing deep into the forearm. "Just stop it," the man gasped. "Wait a minute, talk." The knife slipped past the thrashing limbs and sank into his solar plexus. His mouth still working, the fellow staggered back, staring at his hand and arm. "What are you doing?" he asked. Colin took a step toward the man, who slumped against the banister. "Don't," he wheezed. "I have to," Colin whispered. He stooped down. The man's arms came up, too weak now to stop Colin from cutting his throat. The corpse slipped to a sitting position. Colin slid down next to him and watched the students, distant now, entirely unaware of what had just happened. Unlike the two men coming from the city, who were walking purposefully toward him.
Colin put his arms around the dead man's shoulders, as if the fellow had passed out from drinking and he was keeping him warm. But there wasn't any need for that. One of the pair was a tall, bald man with angular features, the other an almost snoutless Khajiit. Arcus and Kasha. Into the river with him now, Arcus said. Just catching my breath, sir. Yes, I saw. Quite a fracas, when all we asked you to do was slit his throat. He fought. You were careless. First time, Arcus, Kasha said, smoothing his whiskers and twitching his tail impatiently. How slick were you? Let's get him in the river and be gone. Fine. Lift, Inspector. When Colin didn't move, Arcus snapped his fingers. Sir? You meant me? I meant you. Sloppily done, but you did do it. You're one of us now. Colin took the dead man's legs, and together they heaved him over. He hit the water and lay there, floating, staring up at Colin. Inspector. He had been waiting 3 years to be called that. Now it sounded like just another word. Put on this robe, Kasha said. Hide the blood until we get you cleaned up. Right, Colin said dully. He got his documents the next day, from Intendant Marall, a round-faced man with an odd ruff of beard beneath his chin. You'll lodge in the Tell Hall. Marall told him. I believe they already have a case for you. He put down the pen and looked hard at Colin. Are you well, son? You look haggard. Couldn't sleep, sir. The intendant nodded. Who was he, sir? Colin blurted out. What did he do? You don't want to know that, son, Marall said. I advise you not to try and find out. But sir, what does it matter? Marall said. If I told you he was responsible for the kidnapping and murder of 16 toddlers, would that make you happy? No, sir. What if I told you his crime was to make a treasonous joke about Her Majesty's thighs? Colin blinked. I can't imagine. You're not supposed to imagine, son. Yours is not the power of life and death. That lies far above you. It comes, in essence, from the authority of the Emperor. There is always a reason, and it is always a good one, and it is not your business, do you understand? You do not imagine, you do not think. You do what you're told. But I've been trained to think, sir. This office trained me to think. Yes, and you do it very well. All of your instructors agree on that. You're a very bright young man, or the Penitus Oculatus would not have approached you in the first place, and you have done very well here. But any thinking you do, you see, is in service to your job. If you're asked to find a spy in the Emperor's Guard, you must use every bit of logic at your disposal. If you're asked to quietly discover which of Count Caro's daughters has been poisoning his guests, again, use your forensic training. But if you're given a clear order to steal, injure, poison, stab, or generally do murder, your brain is only to help you with the method and the execution. You are an instrument, a utensil of the Empire. I know that, sir. Not well enough, or you wouldn't be asking these questions. He stood up. You're from Anvil, I seem to remember. One of the city guardsmen recommended you for testing. Regan O'Prinis, yes, sir. Without his recommendation, what would you be doing right now? I don't know, sir. But he did in a general way. His father was dead. His mother barely got by doing laundry for the better off. He had managed to teach himself to read, but his education wouldn't have gone much further than that, and if it had, it wouldn't have been of any use to him. At best, he might have worked in the shipyard or managed to hire onto a ship. The Imperial invitation had been a dream come true, offering him everything he had wanted as a young boy. And that was still the case despite this. And now he would draw a salary. He could send his mother some of that before she worked herself to death. This is the test, isn't it? He said. Not last night. Now. The intendant ghosted a little smile. Both were tests, son. And this isn't the last, just the last official one. Every day on this job is a new challenge. If you're not up to it, The time to say so is now before you're in over your head. I'm up to it, sir, Collins said. Very well then, Inspector. Take the rest of the day off. Report for duty tomorrow. Colin nodded and walked away in search of his new lodgings.
When Aneg awoke, Mirglin was still sprawled on the floor, his breath rasping loudly. "Oh," she muttered as she rose, pressing her throbbing temples, feeling her belly turn. How much wine had they drunk? She stumbled her way to the kitchen, winced at the sun as she unshuttered the windows. She built a fire in the stove, then opened the walk-in pantry in the diffuse light, and considered the sausages hanging in bundles, the long blades of salted porkfish, barrels of flour, salt, sugar, rice, the pitiful basket of mostly wilted vegetables. There were eggs on the counter, still warm, so Tai must be up and doing his job, which wasn't always the case. And there was her mother's antique leather-bound spice case with its 78 bottles of seeds and dried leaves. Everything she needed. Mirglin wondered in a few minutes after the garlic and chilies hit the oil and the air went sharp and pungent. "I'm too sick to eat," he complained. "You'll eat this," Aneg told him. "And you'll like it. Old Tenny used to make this for Dad, before we couldn't afford her anymore." "If that's so, why is it different every time you make it?" "Last time it had peanuts and pickled pork, not chilies and garlic." "We don't have any pork pickle," she replied. "It's not the specific ingredients that matter, it's the principles of composition, the balance of essences, flavors, oils, and herbs." Saying that, she emptied the spices she had ground a bit before with mortar and pestle, and the earthy scents of coriander, cardamom, lady's mantle seeds, and ginger wafted about the kitchen. She added 2 handfuls of crushed rice, stirred that a bit, covered it with a finger of coconut milk, and set it to simmer with a lid on the pot. When the porridge was done, she ladled it into bowls and added slices of venison sausage, red ham, and pickled watermelon rind. "That looks disgusting," Mirglin said. "Not done yet," she said. She broke 2 eggs and dropped them, raw, into each bowl. Glim perked up and his tongue licked out. "Goose eggs? Aha. Maybe I will try it." She set a bowl in front of him, and after an experimental bite, he began downing it with gusto. Aneg tucked into her own. "I already feel better," Mirglin said. "See? Yes, yes." She took another bite. "So tell me more about this floating city," she said. "When is it supposed to be here?" Ix said they outpaced it for 3 days and it never changed course before they finally got the wind they needed to really leave it behind. "It was headed straight here," he said, "and will arrive sometime early tomorrow at the pace it's coming." So what did he figure it was? A big chunk of rock, shaped like a top. They could see buildings on the rim. The ship's wind caller didn't like it. Quit the minute they got into port and left town, fast, on a horse. What didn't the wind caller like? He kept saying it wasn't right, that none of his magics could tell him anything about it. Said it smelled like death. Did anyone take word to the organism? "I can never understand you two when you're together," a soft voice wisped. She turned her gaze to the door and found her father standing there. "That smells good," he went on. "Is there any for me?" "Sure take," she said. "I made plenty." She ladled him up a bowl and passed it. He took a spoonful and closed his eyes. "Better than Tenithars," he said. "Always in the kitchen, weren't you?" "You learned well. Do you know anything about this?" Aneg said a bit impatiently. It always bothered her, talking to her father, and she knew it shouldn't, and that bothered her twice. But he sounded so soul-weak, as if most of his spirit had leaked out of him. "I wasn't kidding," he said. "You've been like this since you were children. I recognize a few words here and there." Aneg waved the old complaint aside. "This flying city that's supposed to be heading toward us. Do you know anything about that?" "I know the stories," he sighed, picking at the stew. "It started with Irv when Aneg rolled her eyes. crazy old Sijic priest, or whatever they call themselves, said he felt something out in the deep water, a movement of some kind. So, yes, he's crazy and the Inzalil are irritated by him, especially Archwarden Kajalil, so he was dismissed. But then there were the reports from the sea, and the organism sent out some exploratory ships. And they're still out there, looking for a phantom probably.
After all, Erwin has been spreading his message down at the docks. No wonder if sailors are seeing things. My cousin's ship put to sea from Anvil 3 weeks ago, Mirglim said. He did not talk to Erwin. Her father's face tightened oddly, the way it did when he was trying to hide something. Take, she said. Nothing, he replied. It's nothing to worry about. If it's dangerous, the Inzalil will meet it with the same mind that drove the Empire out of Black Marsh and the Dunmer out of Morrowind. But what would a flying city want with Lil Moth? What do the Hist say? Anaig asked. The spoon hesitated halfway up to her father's lips, then continued. He chewed and swallowed. Take. The city tree said it was nothing to worry about. Mirglim made a high, scratchy humming sound and fluttered his eyes. What do you mean? The city tree? He hesitated, as if he had said too much. Look, Hansbits, Glim, Anaig said. We're not visitors here, you know. He nodded. She hated how he was when he spoke straight Tamrielic. He didn't sound like himself. It's just the Hist, they are all connected. Of the same mind. So why mention the city tree in particular? Her father's eyes searched about a bit aimlessly, and he sighed again. The Inzalil in Lilmoth talk only to the city tree. What's the difference? Anaig said. Like Glim said, they're all connected at the root, right? So what the city tree says is what they all say. Glim's face was like stone. Maybe not, he said. What's that mean? Anaig, her father started. His voice sounded strained. When he didn't continue for a moment, she raised her hands. What, take? Thistle, this might be a good time for you to visit your aunt in Laowian. I've been thinking you ought to anyway. I went so far as to set aside money for the voyage, and there is a ship leaving at dawn. That sounds worried to me, Taig. It sounds like you think something's wrong. You're all that's left of me that matters, the old man said. Even if the risk is small. He opened his hands, but would not meet her eye. Then his forehead smoothed, and he stood. I have to go. I am called to the organism this morning. I will see you tonight, and we can discuss this further. Why don't you pack, in case you decide to take the trip? For a moment she saw farther. Laowian was an ocean voyage away, but from there she could reach the Imperial City, even if all she had were her own 2 feet. Maybe. Can Glim go? I'm sorry, I've only money for one passage, he replied. I wouldn't go anyway, Glim said. Right then, her father said. I'll be off. I'll have dinner brought from the Coquina Thistle. No need to cook tonight. And we'll talk about this. Right, Taig, she said. As soon as he was out of earshot, she leveled a finger at Mirglim. You go down to the docks and see what that crazy priest has to say, and anything else you can find out. I am going to Hecua S. Why Hecua S? I need to fine-tune my new invention. Your falling potion, you mean? It saved our lives, she pointed out. On a related note, Glim said, why by the rotting wells are you worried about flying at this time? How else are we going to get up on a flying island, by catapult? Ah. Mirglim sighed. Ah no. Look at me, Glim, Anaig said. Slowly, reluctantly, he did so. I love you, and I'd love to have you along, but if you don't want to go, no worries. I'm not going to give you a hard time. But I'm going, Chew? He held her gaze for a moment, and then his nostrils contracted. Chew, he said. Meet you here at noon. As Mirglim followed Lilmatha's long slump to the Bay Imperials named Oleus, he felt the cloud-rippled sky gently pressing on him, on the trees, on the ancient ballast stone paving. He wondered, which is to say that he gave his mind its way, let it slip away from speech into the obscure nimbus of pure thinking. Words hammered thought into shape, put it in cages, bound it in chains. Gel, the tongue of his ancestors, was the closest speech to real thought, but even an aide, who knew as much Gel as anyone not of the root, her throat couldn't make all the right sounds, couldn't shade the meanings enough for him to really converse with her.